Hello, everybody. This is Deborah and Wendy. You are
Hello.
listening to the Theological Thursday podcast, the show that deep dives into different biblical topics for people who love the Bible and want to challenge themselves. Today, we are talking about a challenging subject. Do we have to be grateful when things are hard?
That's a great question. But luckily, November is National Gratitude Month here in the US. It was started in 2015, and what happens is many people begin a daily practice of gratitude throughout November. So we know that a practice of gratitude is the simplest way to change a person's perspective about the world. I enjoy watching people talk about their lives, what they're grateful for, and the simple kindness they impart on others. And this seemingly small practice is not so difficult when things are going well. I mean, let's be real. In fact, we all know that being grateful is easier when things are good. It's when things are good, it's easy to be happy. It's easy to praise God.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
But what about when things are bad?
Mm,
Oh, when things just pile up and the weight crushes you and you find out you have to spend $300 on a medicine that you normally get for free.
oof.
What do you do then? What do you do then? Well, the Bible gives us simple directions. Simple. Not easy, but simple. 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, "Be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus." Again, so simple. Yet, I will say the phrase "in all circumstances" is the hardest thing we as Christians will do.
Whew. That word all. That's a loaded word. And I really do feel like it's important to define all circumstances. I don't know about you guys, but I, Deborah, sometimes struggle with being grateful when things are difficult. And to answer the question about all circumstances, I look to the Christians who have walked before me to give examples, because I don't think the Bible specifically gives an example of all circumstances, but the folks who've walked before us certainly live those examples. And a living
Mm-hmm.
example is always a powerful example. So there are many amazing biblical examples of people who are grateful in terrible suffering. And the one that comes to mind the most readily is Job. And I want to remind everyone here before we start talking about Job that there is no promise of an easy life here on earth. We've talked
Nope.
about this before. We'll say it again. There is no promise of an easy life. Okay. In fact, I do believe there are verses that say we will face trials, we will face tribulations,
Mm-hmm.
and even he will face persecution.
Jesus was very clear that when he spoke to the disciples, he said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." It's recorded in the book of John, chapter 16, verse 33. And so this is a promise of Jesus that things are going to be hard. Jesus also says at other times that if the world hated him, they will hate you, meaning the disciples as well. So things were not easy for Jesus. So I don't know why we think things are going to be easy for us.
I think we think things are going to be easy for us because we want things to be easy for us. Because,
True.
if God and the folks have gone before us, then, hopefully they've paved the way. In fact, I think our culture a little bit says, if someone else has done the hard work, we can cash in on that hard work and we can utilize
Mm-hmm.
that. And the reality is nobody can walk your walk for you with Christ, with God, right? So there's not really a path that's been forged before you other than examples given that you can utilize in your own walk, which is where we come back to Job here. And we realize that he was on top of the world. He had a wife. He had many children. He was an excellent businessman because his business was thriving. He was feeling great about his whole life and everything about it. In fact, he was also a spiritual leader in his town. His neighbors and friends, they came to him for advice, which just says he had something that others did not and they wanted. So he sounds like he was doing quite fantastic. And then it was all gone. All gone. And what did Job do? Well, he had a couple of options. First thing he could have done was curse and scream and beat his chest, saying, "Why me?" But that's not what he did. In fact, Job's own wife suggested that he curse God. That's quite the statement. It's interesting. I love conversations between spouses because we're candid with our spouses, right? And we give them advice on how we feel. And she must have been feeling pretty bad too, because Job's calamities also affected her. They certainly weren't. And that's actually something I think we need to at least acknowledge, that sometimes when we go through a situation, it's not just us that walks the situation. It could be our entire family that has to deal with the situation with us. Or maybe we have a divorce because spouses decide to separate and our children have to walk that challenging path with us. Nobody really gets off scot-free when certain things happen, especially, in Job's case where he lost his land and his animals, and eventually he loses his children and his wife. But I think that her response is interesting because I think it came from her rather than, her heart, I should say, rather than how Job really felt. And we know that this is not how Job felt because his response to his wife saying, "Curse God," was, "You talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?" And so in all of this, Job said nothing wrong. And I love that verse. I think it's really interesting because his heart was still with the Lord, understanding that the Lord is with us in the good and in the bad. And it reminds me of the verse 2, that God works all things for his glory. I think I've slightly left a couple words out of that particular verse that are key here.
All things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose.
I'm like, I know I had the gist, but not quite the right thing. But then it says all things. And again, all things implies the good and the bad. It's not just the good.
Right. And even though that was a New Testament verse that we just talked about, we know this is true because if we go back to Psalm 23 and we listen to the psalmist, the psalmist wrote, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." So yeah, good and bad, mountaintop and valley.
Yeah, it does definitely, that verse. I love that because it says we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, not, through the mountaintop on high in the sun.
Right. Everything's unicorns and sunshine and rainbows.
I appreciate the psalmist, which was mostly David, sharing the fact that there were plenty of negatives, plenty of time in which he sang songs crying out to the Lord as much as he sang happy songs. I like that. The man had songs in his heart, and I think that's good. It's a powerful way to remember your Bible verses too, guys. You can actually sing them or find songs that sing about certain verses to help you remember them. So we have another amazing example of all circumstances, and we find that in my favorite person here. And Corrie Ten Boom wrote the book, The Hiding Place, which I've shared with you guys before. But in this particular case, it's Corrie's sister, Betsy, who shines. Corrie and Betsy were in Ravensbrück concentration camp. They were in a barracks to begin with that was tolerable. And then they were moved to barracks 28, and it was not tolerable anymore. So even in a bad situation, we find this homeostasis of this is where I can survive with this. And then they were taken so far out of even that comfort zone into something even worse. And this barracks was dark and filthy and swarming with fleas. And Corrie was like, "I am not a happy camper here." And her sister Betsy took 1 Thessalonians to heart and really exclaimed, "We can be thankful in all circumstances. God tells us to be thankful for this." And Betsy sings praises and thank you for everything. And Corrie joins in with her, thanking them finally as the last thing for those fleas. And I just love that imagery, being thankful for fleas. Like, how can you possibly be thankful for vermin? Right? Like, we all know fleas carry disease. We actually talked about that back in September. They were the big carriers of the bubonic plague. They're carriers of typhus. They're carriers of typhoid. They're carriers of dysentery, all kinds of things. Guys, we know that fleas are bad and cause harm. So how can you be grateful for something that does that? And I love the verse as a reminder, we can't accept the good without the bad. And I will share just a little bit here. The end of the book, The Hiding Place, and Corrie also touches on it in her book, Tramp for the Lord, which she wrote afterwards. Those fleas were actually their saving grace. Why? Because they carry disease. And the concentration camp guards were terrified of them. And it gave Corrie and Betsy an opening for their ministry. They were able to host prayer time and Bible study in multiple languages. They were able to sing and encourage each other openly that they would not have been able to do, and they had not been able to do in the other places that they were. And it was solely because of the fleas. And they were actually told that later. Like, we didn't go in there because of the fleas, so we avoided you. Whatever you did because we didn't care, because we didn't want to be near the fleas. So those fleas were the things that were such a blessing. Sometimes we miss the blessing for looking at it as something that's terrible. And I like these two particular examples because I think they're important to understand that thankfulness is not just for beauty and flowers and the ease of life. Thankfulness is also for the ugly, the thorny, the fleety parts of life. Okay? It's in all circumstances. So I have some questions for you. What areas are you holding hostage from God? What areas of your life could you be grateful for instead of harboring resentment? Where can you submit? Where can you look at the ugliness of life and say thank you? Where you haven't said thank you yet. Or where you're looking at it going, I don't even know if I can say thank you for this. Like, this is terrible. What does that terribleness mean?
We complain about being busy, but how often are we thankful for being busy?
Ooh, I like that.
Or we complain, you guys, you hear my dog. This is just life. So dog barking. I'm thankful the dog is barking. I'm thankful I have a dog. I'm thankful for the ability to pay out of pocket for a medication that I needed. I didn't want to, but I'm thankful that I could. So this is just a reframing of your situation and your circumstances. And this is also why we talk about starting your day with gratitude. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it helps set the tone for your day. Your quiet time helps set the tone for the day. And then you get to look at things in a way that, instead of saying this happened to me, you're saying I get to experience this because of this. And in that way, you can be joyful and be thankful and rejoice.
You just made me think of something, Wendy, that I hadn't thought of prior to right this moment. And it's interesting. Why are we so bent on the negative and it almost feels like we're punishing ourselves. Oh, we're so busy. Yeah. Negative. Oh, we have to work out. Negative. Oh, I have to eat right. Negative. Oh, I have to budget. Negative. Like, I don't understand, like, it's a hardwire. I think we all do it. I don't know if it's a society thing. I don't know if it's because we are in an ease and we have a lot in our country that we have this. I don't know. But I find it interesting because I hear the negatives in a lot of things. Like, we could easily reframe, just like you said, like, you have a dog. That's a wonderful thing. I get to work out. I think that's a wonderful thing. It's not a punishment. Eating well, not a punishment. Doing life even when it's difficult, it's not a punishment. It's not anything that we've done or caused, But I do feel like we use that phraseology of like a punishment-based phraseology quite a bit. That's a total aside. You guys can weigh in and tell me what you think.
Yeah, I don't know. I do find it interesting that we kind of resort to the "O me miserans," as my Latin teacher used to call it, the "Oh, woe is me," because we want the attention. We want people to feel sorry for us. But that doesn't make us better. And it doesn't improve our heart or our mind at all.
No, it doesn't. And actually, I listened to a lecture a few years back on pride. And I liked the pride lecture, and being prideful, I should rephrase. And the reason I liked it is because it was a multifaceted look at what pridefulness is. And the pride that we all know is, look at me, I'm on the mountaintop, I'm perfect, all these things are great. But the speaker actually talked about the other side, and I found it fascinating that we can have that same look at me attitude, but from a woe is me perspective. Oh, look at me. I can't do anything. My life is so difficult. Here's all these bad things that happened to me. It's actually the same activity with a different, it's just a different way to do the same prideful activity. And I was just kind of blown away. I never would have considered that pridefulness. But once it was kind of open, I was like, oh, that's definitely something I need to be cautious about, because it's so easy to say, look at me, this bad thing is going on. And let's be honest, we all know a negative review on Yelp gets all the attention. If I write the same restaurant, man, they were so kind to me, the food was amazing, everyone just goes glossed over, we don't even see it. I write, the restaurant owner was rude, and bam, I got 500 comments and all kinds of people are weighing in. No, they weren't. Yes, they were. They weren't even there. I don't know why they're having an argument for it. But you've seen that. I saw it yesterday on my Nextdoor page. It was great. But again, it was a look at me type of an activity. Right? So it's pridefulness.
It is. And one of the things that we can do is to take the focus off of ourselves. Let's say you're leaving a review. What did they do well? You stayed, right? You stayed in the thing, you stayed in the place, you paid your money. They did something well. Start with that. What did they do well? And then what can they improve? Not what they did wrong. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Not in a gossipy kind of way, like, hey, they did really well at this. They could do better at this. Because that's how people learn. Because if you truly want them to get better, that's the best way to present what should be constructive criticism.
Yes. I actually had another thought. And the verse that just popped into mind is, revenge is mine, says the Lord. And oftentimes I think we use some of those negative things to exact revenge on someone, get people on my side so I can be justified in feeling the way I do. And that's actually not a biblical tenet. That's not what we're supposed to do. So James, in the book of James challenges us with this particular thing. And he says, it's James chapter 1, verses 2 and 4. And he says this, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Not only are we going to have trials, there's an expectation of trials for an expectation of growth. Just like Wendy was saying, even in the commentary of leaving a review, if your expectation is not revenge, but rather growth, you're going to leave something constructive, and you're going to take something constructive from all of your trials. They go hand in hand.
And think about the things that we know in life require pain sometimes, or just the passage of rough times in order to get better and grow. The process of a diamond being created.
It's good with people.
If you work out and you're trying to build muscle, you are literally, right, Deborah, tearing muscle fibers and then rebuilding them into a stronger muscle.
And it's not always a clean process when you do that. Sometimes an injury occurs from a movement you've done 100 times, right? Like we assume that this is like, if we do something consistently, small bits at a time, that we can avoid injury. And generally we can, but that's not always the case. There's a reason that your body is speaking to you.
Yeah.
Just like the diamond shoe, you put it under enough pressure, right? But there can still be flaws, or what they call inclusions, inside of a diamond.
Yes. Paul, the Apostle Paul, a lot of times uses the analogy of running a race.
I love this one.
You don't start running. You don't say, I'm going to run a marathon today, and have never gone through the weeks of months of agony and pain and growth and, oh my gosh, I've got to run 19 miles today. Oh my goodness gracious. And I've never run a marathon. I've only run, the longest I've done is half marathons. But I'm telling you, there comes a point in that half marathon when it could be halfway through, you could be through the first 5K of it, when you say, oh my goodness, why did I think this was a good idea? This hurts. Wow. And then you finish it and you are grateful and you are thankful and you're ready to do it again. Because now you've forgotten about all that pain.
But
you've experienced the glory.
This example is so good, Wendy. Like literally so good. You have no idea what else you hit upon. So the marathon, I've run, Deborah, I over here have run a marathon and a half marathon. I love them. I like on occasion. But Wendy's comment about, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? I remember the point in my training for, I can't remember which race it was, one of those long races. It was either the marathon or the half marathon. And I remember making the comment, well, it hurt a lot to get going, but it hurts worse to stop.
Yes.
And what an interesting tenet. It hurts worse to stop. When we get going, it's painful. When we make changes, it's painful. But to go back to that original state of the non-doing is also painful. It's not like when you've grown and when you do things, it's actually more painful to stop. In fact, a lot of people who use exercise to self-regulate, or maybe they just want to be healthy, they will actually tell you when they get injured, the worst part about being injured is being forced to stop, because that daily habit has been removed. It's now more painful to not show up for the routine than it was to do the routine in the first place. That also talks about our walk with the Lord. It's not easy when we start. It's awkward. It's messy. We're growing. But at some point, it would be a whole lot more awkward and messy and uncomfortable to step back into that old life. I love your example. That was phenomenal, Wendy. Like, that rocked my socks there. I love that.
Give thanks to the Holy Spirit. Hello.
So we say this too. And last week we said this, that Christianity is an easy faith. And the steps themselves are easy. The walk is often hard as we learn to surrender and submit to the Lord. And that goes for your prayer life. Are you submitting those nasty, thorny, fleety thoughts to the Lord? Or are you just saying thank you for the good stuff? Are you showing up in the hard areas with the Lord? Or are you just showing up in the good stuff? And let's also remember that when the good stuff comes along, sometimes we don't even show up with the Lord because, well, we made it.
Yeah, we thought it was us. That was all me, dog. I totally did it. Nobody else. It sounds so silly when we put it that way, but that's exactly what we do.
It is. And we have to dig into our relationship and our faith with the Lord, because there's always growth. We are not perfect. We have not arrived. Even to the end of James's challenge there, it says, "So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." And that verse actually makes me a little nervous, because the only way we're perfect and complete is if we are passed away and gone from this life and with Jesus. Like, there is no perfect on this planet, in this life. So this verse is like really clear. When you have your max endurance, you're with the Lord. And maybe that's not how he intended it, but that's kind of how I took it in this last thing. I was like, oh, that's a little, he says you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. And I think the only time the Bible tells me that when I'm perfect and complete and need nothing, we are resurrected with the Lord.
So I think it's because the next thing James says after that.
Probably. What did he?
The next thing he says after that, verse 5, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled, such as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do.
Ooh, I probably should have wrote the rest of that in there. That's powerful. I like that.
Yeah. Some of you, look, like we said last week, some of y'all out here burning sage, doing crystals, doing the whole God and Jesus and astrology, doing all sorts of nonsense. God alone.
Well, the way you say that makes me feel like we're talking about marathons. There is no shortcut to the end.
No.
And like, you can't imply that there's a shortcut to the end. You have to run the race. You don't get to cut to the end and be successful. You don't build a business in a day, a dream in a day, a physically sculpted body in a day. You have to show up and do the work consistently.
Yeah, that overnight success took 20 years to happen.
And that's a funny, I think we talk about like Instagram and Facebook and all of those things, like the highlight reels of people's lives, but we also look at people's success and not realize, like, we didn't see the seed in the ground germinating, right? We just see the rose bush or the radish or the carrot, whatever it is that you grow. I love radishes. They grow in 20 days. I have a little less patience for the 120-day pumpkin, right? Like the germination on a pumpkin, because a pumpkin takes roughly 120 days to get the big round orange fruits that we buy at this time of year. But the germination is like twice as long. Germination for a radish is almost overnight, right? In 28 days, you have a full radish harvest. That's great. And that's how we all feel like it looks. But the reality is most of them are those 120-day pumpkins. Mm-hmm. They really are. Or corn or whatever it is that takes the same length of time. Like, nothing comes to fruition overnight. Even the germination, the quick germination, the short-term goal, which I always refer to short-term goals as my radish goals, because, they're quick, they're fast, they're going to germinate and come to a vegetable in 28 days. Great. Mm-hmm. But, they're not the size or scope of a giant pumpkin.
Right.
I understand why the Bible used so much agrarian imagery, because it's when you get into the ground and you've grown some of your own stuff, you're like, oh, it's perfect. It really fits.
That's okay. Some of us who grew up in the city are just trying to translate.
True. And I will say this, until I started growing seeds with my kids, I never understood just how long some things take. The radishes, like I read on the back of the package, was 28 days. And I honestly, when I first planted it, did not believe it. But you really do get a radish harvest. But guys, a radish is like the size of a quarter. Right?
Wow.
I mean, they're not that big. Like a regular red radish is, about the size of somewhere between $0.25 and $0.50. They're not really big. So if you're looking for like fast, great, it's going to be something small. If you're looking for something large, well, guess what? That takes time. Longer time.
Who was it that said there's no shortcut to any place worth going?
I don't know. That's a great quote, though.
Yeah. I know I didn't make it up. I know I heard it from someone who heard it from someone else. So you guys, let us know. If you heard that quote before, there's no shortcut to any place worth going.
Well, and it's kind of a reminder that it's a journey, an endurance,
Mm-hmm.
a race. All right, guys, I don't want to take away from our action points, so we're going to hop to those today. And I will say this, these ones may just make you feel a little more tender and raw, because we're going to ask you to dig a little bit into your heart rather than a physicality. We've given you a lot of physical activities to do. These ones are a little bit more heart activities to do. Or I should say maybe mental activities coupled with heart. But the first one here is to cultivate, and Wendy said this actually earlier, guys, so we're reiterating this. We are to cultivate a prayer life with the Lord. And there's many ways to do this. One of the ways that I learned as a kid, and I have never forgotten it because it's the funniest acronym, it's called CATS. I have since found out that they have changed the acronym into ACTS, and I like it a little bit better because, we can all remember that we have action points. So we're going to ACTS, ACTS, though I will say the CATS one makes it so I've never forgotten, and it's been like 30 or 40, 30 years. So it stuck. But ACTS stands for this. The A in ACTS is adoration. It's praising God for who he is. The C in ACTS is confession. And that is, we need to confess our sins to God. Yep, you have sins. Dig deep. Trust me. You said something ugly. You had an ugly thought. You kicked, your toe into something and hopped around and, raged at the person who left the thing in the way. We have sins. Trust me. T is for thanksgiving. And it is thankfulness for all things. Okay? The good, the bad, the ugly. The S is for supplication. And I love this part. Supplication is simply the act of requesting help from God for the needs of yourself and others. And he does say to come and ask. And so, guys, just if you can remember that, the acronym is ACTS. And we can put that in the show notes, right? Cool.
Yes. But I want to draw before we move on to the next action step, I want to draw your guys' attention to the order in which these things are. Adoration comes first.
It does.
You are first to praise and glorify God and just be in awe of who he is, that he is consistent, that he is who he says he is always, and that, there is nothing too big or too small for God. So the fact that adoration comes first, to me, I think is huge. Yes, you will get to Thanksgiving, but I feel like, what I think is that by putting adoration first and then confession, by the time you get to Thanksgiving, your heart and your mind have changed so that you can give thanks for the good and the bad. And that by the time you then get to the supplication, you have a better idea of just exactly what it is you're asking from God.
I like that. It's making me feel like the adoration portion of it makes me want to sing.
Yes, it's like the song that says, "I will enter his
with
courts
thanksgiving
with
in my heart and enter his courts with praise."
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. I probably butchered the lyrics, but you guys know what I'm talking about.
You got it. I was singing it with you.
Oh, okay.
No, you were good. Yay. You were good. I was actually thinking that one myself. I also was thinking about a lot of the Psalms, and there's so much like adoration for who God is in the Psalms. And we hear it over, like, God, you are the one who provided. God, you are the one who was there for me. God, you are the one who smote my enemy. Like, there is this adoration for the power that God has. And I love that's again, we talk about examples of, the people the Christians who've walked before us, or the believers, Christ, God's kingdom, who walked before us. And the psalmist, David, the psalmist, is such a good example. And you can see his relationship with the Lord through all of the Psalms, right? Some are up high, some are down low. There's never a status quo. And I think that this, even the Acts, gets us into never a status quo place, because we're going to have highs, we're going to have lows. But if we only pray for the highs, we've missed half the relationship. All right. Step number 2, and it is a physical action step here, and this is to journal daily what you are grateful for, making submissions for the good and for the bad things around you.
Yes.
You know, making sure you write something new each day, no repeating. I don't want to see a journal. I wouldn't want to see a journal that said, you know, I'm thankful for we have a dog. He's lovely, and I'm very thankful for him. But if I wrote only that every day, I'm missing out on so many other amazing things in the house and so many amazing things that I've experienced to just write that.
Yes. Can you be thankful for your messy house? Absolutely.
You got a house to live in, don't you?
And you got stuff to make it messy.
Oh, that's spicy. You do have stuff to make it messy. You could have an empty house. I was just thinking about it in the laundry. Laundry is my nemesis, guys, just so you know. It like multiplies in the machine. I don't know what's wrong with it. It's like, it's a magic machine. You put it in there and it multiplies clothes. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's not laundry is my nemesis. I do not enjoy it. However, it may be my nemesis, but I am beyond grateful that I have clothing to wash for my children. And maybe it doesn't get folded perfectly and put away, but I am still grateful that I had clothes to wash for my kids.
Right.
You know, that's an important thing.
And this isn't to make you feel bad. This is just to get you to acknowledge that you are truly blessed.
Yes. Also, I want to touch on something. I did a little bit of research as I was prepping for this chat today. And one of the things that was really interesting, and I think it was on like mindbody.net.org, something like that.
Mind, Body, Green?
No.
Very Well Mind?
Oh, maybe, I think it was Very Well Mind. And when I was looking up like a daily journal, like a daily gratitude practice of like journaling, kind of just getting an idea of what that looked like, one of the little captions actually really stood out to me. And it was unique because I looked at several sites, but this site actually said the people who acknowledged the bad things in their life had more profound changes than the people who only acknowledged the good things. And I was a little surprised to see that align with the biblical principles, given the website I was on. But I think that that's interesting, that that's a measurable thing outside of like what God is telling us to do. Like, if everybody does this, there's benefits. And God has clearly told us that we are supposed to. And I think that gets missed when we're looking at websites just easily being like, okay, gratitude practice, write 5 things that I'm glad for. Do not miss out on the entirety of the gratitude practice. Be grateful for 10 messy things. Okay. Number 3, this is a difficult one. And this is one that your guys are going to have to mature into. And I say this as somebody who has mouth impulse control issues. When you find yourself complaining, reframe your complaint into a comment. It is important to rewire how you speak because it changes the way you think. Your words matter. And Wendy shared this with me a couple days ago, and I really liked it. It was a good reminder. And she said, your words have the power of life and death. And that's Psalm 18:21. Actually, Psalm 18:21 actually says it more specifically. The tongue can bring death or life. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences. Oof. So, a prime example is if you're complaining, just Wendy and I actually gave you some really good ones when we were talking about the journaling. Good example of reframing. I have a messy house, and it's kind of a complaint. And her way of twisting it and changing it around was, I have things in my house to make it messy with. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
an awkward English sentence. It doesn't matter. The reality is, the reality is it's more important to reframe how we think. And just like we
Mm-hmm.
talked about earlier, we come into the negative mindset very easily. It is a skill set to change. So you're going to find yourself thinking negatively. You're going to find yourself speaking negatively. You just have to
Mm-hmm.
actually stop at the end of it and reframe it. Eventually, what you'll do is you will stop midway through and you'll reframe it. And then eventually, what you'll do is your whole mindset will be shifted and you won't speak that way at all.
So here's another personal
Mm.
example. For 5, 6, 7 years when I lived in Baltimore City, where I'm from, I didn't have a car. My car had died. Then it got towed away, and I never had the money to get it fixed. So I was just without a car. But I lived pretty close to a couple of bus lines. So as I had done when I was a kid, I just took the bus everywhere to work, to shop, to entertain, or whatever. But at first, and you hear this a lot when you ride public transportation, people say, oh my gosh, I can't wait till I get a car. Oh my gosh, I can't wait till I have this. I can't wait till I don't have to ride the bus anymore. But we never think about the good parts of taking public transportation. It did save me money. I didn't have a car payment. I didn't have to pay for insurance. I didn't have to pay for gas. I didn't have to pay for maintenance. Also, I walked more. I walked a ton more. I got to talk to people more. I got to see more of the city that I wouldn't have seen or wouldn't have done if I was just zip zip in and out in the car fighting traffic. So there were a lot of relationships to be fostered, and I met a lot of good people because I was walking and not driving. And I didn't think about that really until like just now. Like I was not grateful in that period of time at all. I just dealt with it. Right. Like but I was always looking forward to the day when I had a car again. Right. So it wouldn't have to take me 2 hours to get to work and in 2 buses in the subway or something like that. Is that inconvenient? Yes. But were good things happening still? Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, oddly enough, you've kind of pointed out what you could lose when you got the car again. So you lost the physical movement, you
Mm-hmm.
lost the relationships, or the ability, I should say, relationship building. And that's actually an important thing. We
Right.
are relationship builders. Wendy and I have touched on this so many times, guys. It's not an action point for today, but just we are humans and we need to foster relationships. If you want to bring someone to church, you're not doing that if you just drive by the same person every day and be like, I see them every day. That's not a relationship.
Mm-hmm. No.
Our,
No, you have to earn that street cred, people. Earn the cred.
you make me laugh so much. All right. All right. Point number 4. This is a good practice for teaching children about gratitude. And I think it's an exercise we as adults will be able to do a little bit more easily, but it's very important. And this exercise is not just reframing your mind, but it is learning how to expand your gratitude outside of a singular item or incident. And I'm going to give you an example
Mm.
using an item. For instance, what happens if you get a present that you do not like? Okay.
Mm.
It is very easy for us to be like, ugh, why? Okay. But we need to take a step back and we need to remember all of the parts that actually apply to the situation that brought the gift to you in the first place. So the first thing that you have is, okay, somebody thought of me and brought me a gift. You don't have to love the gift, but you can absolutely be thankful that someone thought of you.
Mm-hmm.
You can be thankful of the fact that they thought of you and then took the time to pick out a gift for you. Time is something to be grateful for. Then they made the effort to wrap it up and present it to you. That's also something we can be grateful for. Being grateful for a specific situation, or even a specific item is so much more than the small facet of the item in the situation itself. We need to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger the picture is, and it's fine if you have to go out pretty far, you just have to realize that there is a place for gratitude somewhere along the line that is not that small bit. Okay? And this is an exercise that I think is extremely good for small children, because we want them to have grateful hearts, but we don't tell them that gratitude is more than the item, right? And we get frustrated if our kids are like, they get something and they're not really interested in it. They're like, yay, it's a thing. And then they pitch it 2 seconds later. And then you're like, I should have just bought them the box. They played with it longer. And part of that is because we actually have to instill in our children and ourselves a gratitude that's a deeper understanding of where the item came from, what was involved in the item, or again, situation. It could be even, you guys could easily make this into a surprise party. Maybe surprise parties aren't your thing. My gosh, you had people who thought of you to create you a surprise party. You've got people who showed up. You have someone who cared enough to host you something. There's just small pieces. And again, they may not be your thing, but you can find somewhere in that pool of information something to be grateful for. And when you say thank you, we're not saying thank you necessarily, again, for one specific thing. We're thanking them for a broader situation, including time and care and thought. It's just so much more than a single nuanced piece of thing.
Yes. And to that, I want to add, so this would be action step number 5, because the things that we've been talking about aren't really things that you've been doing with other people. You're journaling, that's a solo activity. Your prayer time, solo activity generally. Reframing your thoughts. But what about the words you speak to your family, your husband, or your wife? And it's mostly women who listen, so we'll acknowledge there may be some men out there listening. But do you say that you appreciate them? Do you say you appreciate what they do? That even though they didn't cook that dish the way you would have cooked the dish, did you appreciate the fact that they made dinner? Because that was last night. Right? I'm telling on myself. But no, when you don't hear that people appreciate you for the effort that you put in, for the work that you do, for putting in the long hours at work, for putting up with the terrible commute and things like that, it makes you wonder, what are you doing it for? Why? If nobody appreciates it, if no one's life is made better by this effort that you're putting in, then what is the point? Not that we live and die by compliments, but again, this isn't just for the other person. It's mostly for you to vocally express gratitude and appreciation for people giving their time, their effort, their expertise, their love for you.
I like that. People need to hear it. We just do. And there's not a single person that doesn't need to hear some form of appreciation. Right? Don't take someone for granted. And sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but routine, mundane things don't seem like something that we should have to be grateful for. But you should. Okay? All circumstances. Like, it's everything. Taking out the trash. Thank you for taking out the trash. You know what? Someone took out the trash. You could have had to do it.
Yes.
You could have had to do and remind everybody and do all the things. And who cares if it's not perfect? Like, you don't have to do part of it if it's not perfect. I always felt that way. I used to be frustrated when my kids were young, because as I was teaching them to clean, I had to come alongside or after the fact and fix it. And that took effort. But it didn't diminish the effort that my children put into their inexperienced cleaning. And it's inexperience. Like, we're not perfect, not even as adults, right? So
Right.
they should still reap the gratitude of, thank you for putting forth the best effort. It doesn't mean that they don't get corrected with some constructive criticism to, scrubbing one square of tile in the 32 squares in the house that you were designated doesn't mean you're done, right? But like, good effort on the one you did. Okay, now let's get the rest finished. Like,
Right.
it's
Like we say, A for effort.
an A for effort. Yes, an A for
Yeah.
effort and a show up for fixing the rest.
Yes.
I love that. All right, guys, that is actually all we have for you guys today. We would very much love to know how you've incorporated a gratitude practice into your life. So if you could leave us a message at www.speakpipe.com/Bible Talk, we would be delighted to hear how you guys incorporate a practice of gratitude. Also, if you are in need of prayer, you can leave us a message in the same location, and it can be anonymous if you would like. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. Share this episode with your friends and family, and as always, leave us a review because that helps others find our show and allows us to serve more listeners.
All right. So, Deborah, will you pray us
Yes,
out?
ma'am. Dear Lord, thank you so much for the examples of the people who have gone before us to show us what all circumstances means. And Lord, this has really challenged me to understand that I need to make sure that I open my own eyes and look at the good and the bad equally and be grateful for both. And Lord, I know this is going to be a challenge in my life as I try this and experience this. And Lord, I just pray for each of the listeners that as they begin to slowly add this into their lives and their practice of speaking with you, that they find it easy and that they find that they're able to genuinely dig into those ugly things of life and be grateful for them. And I know that's a heart change, Lord. So I just pray that as we do all of this, you work on our hearts and you help us to be soft and grow with you, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, guys, until next time.
Bye.
Bye.